You know, in Washington, scandals have a funny way of circling back to the people who thought they were immune. And right now, John Bolton, the once all-powerful national security advisor under President Trump, is finding that out the hard way. The FBI raid on his home and office has shocked the political world, and the fallout is only just beginning. Let's back up a little. For years, Bolton has carried himself as if he were untouchable. He was the guy who wagged his finger at everyone else, quick to accuse others of mishandling classified information, quick to pile on when the media went after Trump. But when agents spent hours combing through his Maryland home and his Washington, D.C. office, that all changed. Suddenly, the walls aren't just closing in. They might actually be collapsing. The Biden administration once had every reason to go easy on Bolton. After all, he became something of a darling for the left when he turned against Trump, appearing on cable news shows to blast the president. That made him useful as a talking head. But if you believe the reports now emerging, those political alliances won't shield him from what could be devastating legal consequences. According to insiders, this raid isn't just about some mishandled files that ended up in his 2020 book. That's what the mainstream media wants people to believe, that it's just a technical issue, just another case of sloppy handling. But the whispers coming out of this investigation suggest something much darker. Some sources claim Bolton may have been profiting off classified American intelligence. If that turns out to be true, we're not talking about an ethics violation here. We're talking about treason. And treason isn't just another political buzzword. It's a crime that can end your career, destroy your reputation, and potentially land you behind bars for the rest of your life. Think about the irony. After years of cheering on lawfare against Trump, Bolton is suddenly discovering that no one is above the law. The very system he once weaponized against political opponents is now coming after him. Agents didn't show up casually. They carried out boxes of material, searching specifically for classified documents that Bolton may have been hoarding long after leaving his post. This wasn't a fishing expedition. A federal judge in Maryland signed off on that warrant, which means prosecutors had to present credible evidence that Bolton still had sensitive documents in his possession. And here's the kicker. This isn't about old, stale information. To get that warrant approved, the FBI had to show that Bolton may currently be engaged in wrongdoing, whether holding classified intelligence he has no right to, or spreading it for personal gain. Jonathan Fahey, a well-respected federal prosecutor, pointed out that judges don't sign these warrants lightly. The fact that one was issued at all should be sending shockwaves across Washington. It's a stark contrast to the narrative Bolton himself has been pushing for years. Remember how he talked about Trump's handling of documents, accusing him of treating classified information like casual newspaper clippings. Bolton practically mocked the idea that Trump could have been responsible with state secrets. Yet now, the tables have turned. He's the one being accused of treating sensitive intelligence with reckless disregard. And if the rumors are true, it's not just recklessness, it's deliberate profiteering. Meanwhile, the mainstream outlets are doing everything they can to spin this. To them, Bolton is still that heroic figure who stood up against Trump. But even his biggest fans have to be nervous right now. Because if these allegations hold water, their champion won't be remembered as a truth-telling patriot. He'll be remembered as a traitor. Let's not forget, Bolton wasn't exactly beloved before his anti-Trump crusade. Republicans and Democrats alike saw him as a warmonger, someone who never met a conflict he didn't like. His tenure as national security advisor was short and chaotic. He was fired after a string of disagreements. And for years after, both sides of the aisle wanted nothing to do with him. It was only when he became a vocal Trump critic that he found a second act. Now, that act may be coming to a spectacular end, and the timing couldn't be worse for him. The Justice Department has been under immense pressure to prove that it isn't just targeting Trump and his allies. By going after someone like Bolton, who once stood firmly in their corner, the DOJ is signaling that the rules apply to everyone. Whether you're a friend or a foe, if you mishandle classified intelligence, you could face consequences. For Bolton, the consequences could be severe. If federal prosecutors decide to press charges, we're not just talking about fines or a slap on the wrist. We're talking about the possibility of prison time. Imagine that. The man who spent years lecturing America about national security could end up living out his days behind bars, stripped of influence, reputation, and power. And yet, what makes this story so compelling is that it's still unfolding. The FBI hasn't revealed the full extent of what they seized. The Justice Department hasn't announced whether charges are forthcoming. All we know for sure is that something serious drove a Maryland judge to approve that raid, and that should terrify Bolton more than anything else. Because at the end of the day, the message here is crystal clear. Karma has a long memory, and John Bolton, for all his posturing, may finally be running out of time. So let's dig a little deeper into why this raid is such a game changer for John Bolton. First, remember how search warrants actually work. The FBI can't just show up to your house because they feel like it. They need what's called probable cause. That means prosecutors had to convince a judge that Bolton was either currently in possession of classified documents or actively involved in misusing them. And here's the important detail. It couldn't just be old information from years ago. To get approval now, in 2020, they had to present fresh evidence. That should make anyone paying attention raise their eyebrows. What could Bolton possibly have been doing that triggered this level of scrutiny? People close to the case are saying the issues don't just trace back to his 2020 book. Instead, the FBI may suspect that he's continued holding or even leaking classified materials well after leaving government. If that's true, it's far more serious than sloppy record keeping. It could cross into espionage or profiteering, which are crimes with extremely heavy consequences. Jonathan Fahey, the former federal prosecutor, explained it clearly. Judges don't hand out these warrants for fun. If a Maryland judge signed off, especially in a state not known for being Trump-friendly, that means the evidence must have been convincing. So despite the spin from the media, this is not some revenge mission dreamed up in Trump Tower. This is a legitimate investigation into possible criminal behavior. And that brings us to the political irony of all this. Bolton spent years accusing Trump of recklessly mishandling classified information. He went on TV interviews. He wrote op-eds. He scolded the former president as if he alone understood the sacred rules of national security. But now the FBI is suggesting that Bolton himself may have been hoarding sensitive documents in his home office. The hypocrisy writes itself. Think about the contrast. Trump, or as president, had the authority to declassify and keep certain documents. You might disagree with how he handled it, but he had a constitutional right that came with the office. Bolton, on the other hand, had no such privilege. Once he left the administration, there was no justification for him to retain any classified material. None. If investigators find proof that he did, that's a criminal act, not a political debate. And this is where things get even more dramatic. Remember the raid on Mar-a-Lago in 2022? The Biden administration authorized the use of lethal force for that search, which turned into a massive controversy. Compare that to how Trump's FBI is conducting the raid on Bolton now. This operation was straightforward, court-authorized, and focused solely on evidence. No extra theatrics, just business. The contrast shows how differently these cases are being handled, and why the narrative of revenge doesn't hold up. Of course, Bolton's defenders in the media are already trying to soften the blow. They argue that it's all about paperwork, that maybe he mixed up clippings with classified documents, that it's just a technical oversight. But that doesn't match what we know. A judge wouldn't approve a raid over old clippings. Something new had to surface, and that something could put Bolton in far deeper trouble than he ever imagined. Let's also talk about Bolton's credibility, or lack thereof. For decades, he's been viewed as one of the most aggressive war hawks in American politics. He was never shy about pushing for military interventions, from Iraq to Iran to North Korea, even within Republican circles. He was seen as extreme. When he was fired from the Trump administration, it wasn't because he was too cautious. It was because he was too reckless. So when you hear that the FBI is now investigating him for possible crimes involving national security, it doesn't exactly come as a surprise to many who have followed his career. This is a man who thrived on brinkmanship, who always seemed ready to gamble with America's security for the sake of power. If he's caught mishandling or selling intelligence, it would almost feel like the final chapter in a story that's been building for years. And here's the kicker. Bolton isn't even that well liked by the people supposedly defending him. Democrats hated him for years, calling him a warmonger. Republicans distrusted him as a backstabber after he turned on Trump. The only reason he's had a second life in politics is because he became a convenient tool for the anti-Trump media. He gave them sound bites. They gave him airtime. But alliances built on convenience rarely last when the heat turns up. And right now, the heat on Bolton is intense. If charges are filed, and that's looking more and more likely, this could mark one of the biggest falls from grace in recent political memory. A man who once strutted through the halls of power, who thought himself untouchable, could find himself in a prison cell, and that would send a powerful message. You can turn against Trump all you want. You can play politics on cable news. But if you break the law with classified intelligence, you're not getting a free pass. For Bolton personally, the damage may already be irreversible. Even before any formal charges, the headlines alone tarnish his credibility. Every interview he gives now will be viewed through the lens of this raid. Every opinion he offers will be dismissed as the words of a man under investigation. His career as a commentator, an author, or a so-called elder statesman may be collapsing in real time. But here's the larger point. This isn't just about Bolton. It's about accountability. It's about whether America's institutions can hold even the most powerful to the same standards as everyone else. For years, Bolton seemed convinced that his connections, his reputation, and his usefulness to the media made him immune. The FBI raid shows otherwise, and that's why people are watching so closely. Because if John Bolton can be brought down, it proves something important, something the American people have wanted to believe for a long time, that no one, not even the loudest, most self-important insiders, is above the law. Now, as this story continues to unfold, one thing becomes crystal clear. John Bolton's legal and political troubles aren't just a passing news cycle. They represent something much bigger about the current state of American politics and accountability. Let's go back to what triggered all of this. The FBI raid. Agents didn't just knock politely and ask for a few papers. They spent hours going through his Maryland home and Washington office, hauling out boxes of materials. That's not standard procedure unless investigators are convinced there's more than smoke. They believe there's fire. And remember, the FBI director himself has publicly stated, "No one is above the law." That statement might sound simple, but in this context, it's devastating for Bolton. For years, he tried to frame himself as the arbiter of national security discipline, accusing Trump and others of being careless or even dangerous. Now the same institutions he once cheered on are pointing the finger directly at him. It's a brutal reversal. The same media that turned him into a hero for his criticism of Trump is struggling to explain why their star witness against the former president is suddenly the subject of a federal raid. And let's be honest, this isn't about partisan revenge. This is about a man who may have crossed lines that no official, current or former, is allowed to cross. If the FBI finds proof that Bolton not only kept, but potentially distributed classified intelligence, the word treason won't just be thrown around casually. It will stick. And if that happens, Bolton's reputation won't just take a hit, it will collapse entirely. Instead of being remembered as a strong-minded, hawkish statesman, he'll be remembered as one of the most unpatriotic figures in modern history. That's a heavy legacy to leave behind. But let's step back for a moment. Why is this story resonating so strongly with the public? Because for years, Americans have watched two different sets of rules play out. Political elites seemed untouchable, while ordinary citizens faced the full weight of the law for much smaller offenses. Bolton, with his arrogance and his relentless attacks on Trump, embodied that double standard. He seemed to think the rules didn't apply to him. This raid flips that assumption upside down. Even the fact that the warrant came from a Maryland judge matters. This wasn't signed off by some conservative, Trump-appointed judge eager to settle a score. It came from a jurisdiction known for being less than friendly to Trump. That alone destroys the idea that this is political payback. It makes it clear the evidence must have been serious enough to convince even a skeptical court. Now, where does this leave Bolton? In the worst possible place, isolated. Republicans won't rally to defend him because he turned his back on Trump and spent years trashing the party. Democrats won't stick their necks out for him either. Their loyalty only extended as far as his usefulness as an anti-Trump pundit. The media may try to spin, but they can't shield him from the reality of a federal investigation. Bolton stands almost entirely alone, with few allies and even fewer defenders. And that's the part that should scare him the most. Washington is ruthless when it comes to protecting its own, but it's even more ruthless when it decides you're expendable. Once you've outlived your political usefulness, you're on your own. For Bolton, the timing couldn't be worse. He may have thought his book deals, his media appearances, and his insider reputation would insulate him. But when agents show up at your door with a search warrant, none of that matters anymore. This is where the story starts to feel like karma. For years, Bolton accused others of undermining national security. He positioned himself as the responsible adult in the room, the voice of discipline and authority. But if the FBI confirms that he was hoarding classified documents, or worse, profiting from them, then all of that posturing collapses in an instant. And let's not forget, Bolton's track record wasn't exactly stellar before this. He was one of the shortest-serving national security advisors in modern history. He clashed constantly with Trump, with other cabinet members, with Congress. His aggressive foreign policy views alienated both Republicans and Democrats. He never built real trust on either side of the aisle. So when this investigation wraps up, don't expect a wave of sympathy. Expect silence, or even celebration, from people who've been waiting years to see him knocked down. Now here's the bigger picture. Accountability is finally catching up with those who thought they could dodge it. Bolton isn't the first high-level figure to face this, and he won't be the last. But his case is unique because of how loudly he claimed to stand for security and law. That makes the fall even harder, and it sends a message that resonates beyond him. If you play games with classified intelligence, the FBI won't care about your politics, your alliances, or your cable news contracts. They'll come knocking. For the American people, that's both shocking and refreshing. Shocking, because Bolton always seemed like the type who could get away with anything. Refreshing, because it suggests the system might actually be working for once, holding someone powerful to the same rules as everyone else. So, where does this end? Right now, Bolton is under investigation. The FBI hasn't released the full inventory of what they seized, and the DOJ hasn't announced charges yet. But the fact that the raid happened at all means there's a high likelihood of criminal evidence. If charges come, Bolton could be facing prison time. And if that happens, the man once seen as untouchable will go down as a cautionary tale. And honestly, maybe that's how it should be. Because no matter how high you climb, no matter how loud your voice on TV, no matter how many times you point fingers at others, the truth has a way of catching up. And when it does, the fall is always harder for those who thought they were above it all. At the end of the day, John Bolton may not just be remembered as a failed advisor or a bitter critic of Trump. He may be remembered as the guy who finally proved that even Washington insiders can't escape accountability. And if that's the case, well, history will not be kind.